The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hey, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. This is Thomas Rickert, and I'd just like to let you know that we're going to wait for another 2 minutes for people to come in, and then the show is going to begin. It's 2 minutes past the hour, so I think we should start. Again, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. My name is Thomas Rickert, Director Names and Numbers with ECO Association of the Internet Industry. And I'd like to welcome all of you to the ICANN71 readout that ECO is conducting in collaboration with ICANN. I'm going to be one of the hosts today. The co-host is Chris Mondini, whom I think all of you know from ICANN. And I'd like to make a few introductory remarks to let you know how we're going to do this today. But first of all, let me share with you whom we have with us. It's an honor and a pleasure to have so many expert speakers with us today. So we have Philippe Foucault. He's with the ISPCP and chair of the GNSO Council, or chair of the GNSO, as it's mentioned in the bylaws. We have Ashley Heinemann with the Registry Stakeholder Group, chair of the Registry Stakeholder Group. We have Sam Demetrio, also with the Registry Stakeholder Group, and she is the chair of the Executive Committee of the Registry Stakeholder Group, and I mistakenly labeled Ashley as the Registry Stakeholder Group. Certainly she's with the registrars, I beg your pardon. Then we have Giovanni Seppia, He's going to talk about the CCNSO, and he's a member of the CCNSO Council. We have Olivier Crepin-Leblanc from ALAC, and we have Wolf Ulrich Knoben, ISPCP, and he's chair of the ISPCP these days. And we have Jorge Cancio, he's with the GAC, he's the Swiss GAC representative. And actually, Jorge has informed us that he's going to join us a few minutes late. So you don't see him at the moment, but he will be with us momentarily. There is a little bit of housekeeping that I think you should be aware of, and that is that we're recording this. So if you don't want your name to be recorded, let's say if you switch on your camera or if you make an intervention or submit a question, then you should leave the webinar or not make yourself heard. So if you proceed with joining this session, then your credentials or your picture might appear in the recording. And this recording will be made available after the meeting. The ICANN expected standards of behavior apply during the session. The link to this document can be seen on the screen, but I'm sure that those who've attended ICANN meetings already are familiar with the rules that we should treat each other with decency and be polite with each other. That doesn't mean that we can't have a good and robust discussion, but it should all be civil and friendly. You will be muted throughout the webinar, and we would like to ask you to submit your questions in the questions pod. You can also raise your hand, and then we will unmute you. And if you make an intervention, please do state your name and your affiliation so that we know who you are with. After we have finished our readout, you will be given the opportunity, and we would really appreciate if you would avail yourselves of that opportunity, answer a few questions, and let you know what you thought about this session. We want to give you the best value for your time, and therefore we would always like to hear what we can do better in order to improve. And if you thought that what we did was great, you can also let us know. So without any further ado, I will now hand over to Chris. And maybe one piece of information for those who've attended previous readouts that we did, we changed the format slightly. The last few times what we did is we had representatives from the various groups, and they presented what's going on, what's being discussed, what are topics of priority for their respective groups. And since ICANN71, there have been a few topics that have been discussed almost everywhere. We thought that we should change the format and go through 3 high-level topics that everyone was talking about. We're going to have short interventions of one of our panelists to set the scene. After that, the other panelists are going to get the opportunity to chime in, should they wish so, and add what their respective groups thought, or maybe they even want to share their personal thoughts with you. And afterwards, we're going to hear a little bit about the CCNSO and their plannings, and also every panelist will be given the opportunity to give a few highlights. That's going to be a minute or so for each speaker, if there's anything of general interest that their respective group has been discussing, which has not been covered earlier during the session. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Chris Mondini to address you as well. Chris, over to you.
Thank you, Thomas. And thank you, Echo. I'm Chris Mondini. I am the Managing Director for the European region for ICANN, sitting in chilly Brussels today. And I'm very grateful for the invitation to help convene this group. Again, this is the 3rd time we've done this kind of readout or report on an ICANN public meeting. So I hope it continues and becomes a bit of a tradition. And as Thomas says, we experiment with the format and welcome the feedback. I really appreciate these kind of sessions. The organization I work for, ICANN, really has some key functions, one of which, of course, is the technical and operational part of administrating the domain name system and the internet addressing system. But the second very important part of what we do is convening a diverse global community to make policies about these addressing systems. And I sit in a department called Stakeholder Engagement. And so I am particularly focused on communicating that this community is open, it's accessible, that people can join and participate and shape the future of the Internet's domain name system and Internet's addressing systems. And a readout like this is useful for people who may not have time to attend all the ICANN meetings or all of the sessions of an ICANN meeting and need to get an overview or an update. But in a group like this, you have also an opportunity to ask questions and dive a little deeper into some of the key topics that are of interest. And so I'm interested to see how the format goes today. A really interesting aspect of the domain name system is that it's not static, it evolves, and there are innovations. And you'll learn about some of those in the presentations that follows. Some of these relate to security and stability. There are innovations in how top-level generic domain names have expanded, allowing new registration of addresses. Even the development of domain names in different alphabets or scripts around the world for the next billion people who will become connected with us on the internet. And the other great thing about these innovations and this evolution is that they really come from a community that creates them in a bottom-up, consensus-driven, multi-stakeholder manner. Good ideas can come from any corner of the community, and if they reach consensus, the ICANN board will approve them, and they become part of the rules for the internet. Now, since 1998, ICANN has been holding an open, free, and public meeting in a different city in a different region of the world 3 times per year. And we move around the world to encourage participation from all geographic regions. And so in addition to geographic diversity, we also have stakeholder category diversity. And you see that on this call, on this webinar today. Whether it's governments and intergovernmental organizations, businesses, internet service providers, organizations that run country code, top-level domain names, technical experts, civil society, advocates, internet users, they are all represented in this policymaking model. And I know a lot of you are represented here today on this readout. Now, those meetings, we haven't been able to have them during the pandemic. With the global health crisis, we're now well over a year into virtual meetings, which has presented some challenges. But I'm pleased to say for the meeting that just concluded, we nevertheless gathered about 1,200 participants. They came from 147 countries. We had 61 separate working sessions, and the participant breakdown geographically here in Europe, we had about a quarter of the attendees, and North America was a little bit more, nearly a third of the attendees. And then there were smaller percentages from other regions around the world. And in addition to the working sessions, we had plenary topics that were presented on things like the impact of government regulation on how ICANN can make policy going forward. There were more operational presentations, for example, on companies that provide reputational block lists that alert organizations to domain names that may be registered for nefarious purposes. You'll hear more detail in the presentations that follow, and I encourage you to ask questions. ECHO has really got a stellar group of community leaders for you here today, and they're deeply knowledgeable. But I do know that we are aiming this to some people who may be more casual followers and even some newcomers. So we will do our best to position and at least introduce the topics in a way that makes them easily understood. But if you have a question about an acronym or a concept and you want to send me a direct message or put something in the chat, do not hesitate. And we're all available for follow-up. we'd love to hear from you individually on any of the topics that strike your interest today. And if time allows, at the end of this, I'll talk a little bit about the contemplated future of ICANN meetings. Where this is a topic of great discussion among our community currently, and we have some results of a survey that we conducted to get some answers for that. So again, thank you for having me, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thanks so much, Chris. So let's dive into the substance immediately. The first topic, which I think is the topic that's been discussed in most sessions, if you do the count by the minute or by the hours that have been spent by the community, and that's DNS abuse. And Ashley and Sam are going to share the introduction. I'm not sure, Ashley, are you going to go first, or is it Sam? It's Sam. So Sam, over to you.
Thank you so much, Thomas. Thank you for having me here, and as well as Ashley, to talk about this. As you touched on in your opening, DNS abuse was a major theme of this ICANN meeting and has been a major theme of many of the last ICANN meetings, I think going back to at least ICANN 66 in Montreal at the end of 2019. And it's a focal area for many of the groups across the ICANN community, from the ICANN board of directors to the various advisory committees within ICANN, and to the generic name supporting organization, including its different constituency and stakeholder groups, including our stakeholder groups, the registries and the registrars. It's also a topic that's come up in a number of the specific reviews that ICANN has conducted as part of its bylaws, including the Consumer Trust, Consumer Choice, and Competition Review that was concluded back in 2018, and the second Security and Stability and Resiliency Review that concluded at the beginning of this year. So I'll defer to Jorge when he joins us on this, but I think it's worth noting that the Governmental Advisory Committee in particular has taken up a strong interest in the topic of DNS abuse, both via its Public Safety Working Group and within the context of the future introduction of new GTLDs. So the GAC has expressed a strong backing for many of the recommendations pertaining to DNS abuse that came out of that Consumer Trust, Competition, and Consumer Choice Review, the CCT review, and has urged the board to take action on many of those recommendations that cover DNS abuse mitigation and aim to lower levels of DNS abuse across the industry before future new GTLDs are introduced. So understanding that there has been so much widespread community interest in the topic of DNS abuse, but also that there are a lot of varying viewpoints and ideas around how it should be tackled. Towards the end of last year, the contracted parties, both the registry stakeholder group and the registrar stakeholder group, independently established working groups to work on the topic of DNS abuse. And these groups have been focused on developing best practices and educational materials for registry operators and registrars, and then educational materials for the broader ICANN community. For the most part, this work, these different output documents and the work streams we're engaging in have been informed by outreach that our respective groups have done with different parts of the ICANN community. And the idea here is that we're trying to work fairly quickly to address immediate pain points and make a meaningful difference and start to move the needle on the topic of DNS abuse before we go down the path of having to deal with all of the sort of rigmarole of something like a policy development process. And a big part of that is because, as I said earlier, there are so many differing views on what constitutes DNS abuse and how it should be tackled within the ICANN context. It's probably worth noting at this point, just for background, that the contracted parties define DNS abuse as 5 main topics: malware, botnets, farming, phishing, and then spam when it is a delivery mechanism for the other 4 topics. So during ICANN71, the contracted party house held an outreach session on the work we've been doing on DNS abuse. This was a follow-up to our session that we held at the last ICANN meeting at ICANN70. And it was really meant to update the community about the work we're undertaking and the outcomes of the conversations we've been having with the other groups. So I can quickly walk through the work items that the registries have been engaging in, and then I'll turn it over to Ashley for what the registrars have been working on, and for any other additional comments about, sort of the topic of DNS abuse in the context of this most recent ICANN meeting. The registry stakeholder group, we started off by providing some input directly to ICANN's Office of the CTO, the group within ICANN that's been working on producing the domain abuse activity reports, which is meant to be sort of an objective overview of the amount of DNS abuse that is out there and is occurring in the world. So we started out by providing some input into that project, trying to just make the reports more accurate, give a better overview of the actual state of play of DNS abuse out there. In the meantime, since that input, we've also developed a document for registry operators to help them understand what their available courses of action are to take in the event that they receive a credible report of DNS abuse. So that's meant to sort of build the capacity of registry operators to take action against and mitigate instances of abuse. And the registries also collaborated with the GAC's Public Safety Working Group to develop a framework on domain generating algorithms that are associated with malware and botnets. So how those can be addressed, how they can be taken offline, and how they can be properly kind of mitigated so that they're not spreading additional abusive domains. We are also, we have a number of items that we're also in the process of working on. One of those is in consultation with the intellectual property constituency, and that is a document on how to mitigate homoglyph attacks. We are also engaging in developing a framework on trusted notifiers. So this is meant to be in consultation with the larger ICANN community on how trusted notifier arrangements can be set up to deal with items that don't fit necessarily in the 5 categories of strict technical DNS abuse, but that registries and registrars may opt to take action on. And finally, the last thing we are starting to dig into is examining those CCT recommendations, since they are still such a topic of interest, and seeing if there's any work that we on the registry side can get done in order to help move the ball forward on implementing some of those recommendations where they may not be able to be, sort of implemented directly by the ICANN board. So Ashley, I'll turn it over to you now for the registrar perspective.
Hey, thanks. Ashley Heineman here, GoDaddy, and also chair of the Registrar Stakeholder Group. And I won't go into too much more detail. I think Samantha got a lot of content in there. But I did just want to say at the outset is that we're really working hard to toot our horns a bit better in terms of what we're doing. I think part of the issue, or at least a perception that not enough is being done on DNS abuse, is because we don't tell people what we're doing about DNS abuse. And I think we're doing a lot more now to be more vocal about our activities, sharing it with the community. We're looking at different ways to make sure we're making our work more visible. So I do encourage you, if you have the chance and interest, to look at the session we just did at ICANN71, because it goes into much greater detail on each of the different items. But from the registrar perspective, we've been involved in a number of different activities, some in line with what Sam just indicated, some a little bit different. So some of the things that we've already done and published include a guide to abuse reporting. When you're reporting abuse to a registrar, we have a lot of information with respect to what we did during the COVID-19 crisis at its height, because there was a lot of misperceptions out there with respect to how to manage COVID-related scams. One example is that people thought that if we got ahead of things and just blocked or reserved domain names that had the word COVID in it or Corona in it, that somehow that was a way to go. But what we found is that that was not the way to handle things. So we go into a bit of detail with respect to what our response was and why. We've also provided some information with respect to what is the minimum required information that we need when folks who use data registration information, if they want to get access to that data, what they need to provide to us. Because now in the GDPR environment, you don't have access to that information like you did in the past, data protection rules. So registrars are in a position now to have to do a balancing test with respect to data protection and the need for third parties to look at this information. We're also working now on an incentive, like what are the different aspects of incentive programs for combating DNS abuse. So basically, what are incentives that can be given to registrars to do better? We're also looking at registrant protections. We're looking at business email compromise scams, the triage tools for registrants, dealing with DNS abuse, registrar attributes for trusted notifiers, which is similar to what Sam just mentioned, and some of the other activities she mentioned as well. So I will stop there because I'm sure everybody on this panel has something to say. So thank you, and happy to discuss further. Back to you, Thomas.
Thank you so much, Ashley and Sam, for that comprehensive introduction to the topic. As you mentioned, I can echo that. I'm sure that a lot of the panelists have a view on that and would like to add to that or share the slightly different view on the topic of DNS abuse. Who wants to go first? I think Olivier was the fastest. Olivier, there you go, and then we go to Wolf Ulrich.
Wow, I'm fast today. I'm so happy. Thank you so much, Thomas. Olivier Crépin-Leblanc speaking, and I'm with the at-large community. I was just going to share with you some of the points. First, thanks for this great summary. You know, we are in at-large is in extensive discussions always with all parts of ICANN, and some of the work that has been done by registrars and registries in recent times has really been very, very helpful. The DNS abuse, as from an at-large point of view, and at-large is effectively the community of end users input in ICANN. It spans around a couple of axes. So first, the policy on DNS abuse mitigation must be put in place prior to a new round of new GTLDs. That's something that we've asked for. And I guess this is one of the reasons why things are already speeding up in this, as we're coming now to a future round of new generic top-level domains being applied for. Ransomware, including phishing techniques with fake systems identifiers, is unfortunately on the rise, and that's been exacerbated by the COVID situation, lots of these phishing things going on. And so we're committed as a community to individual end user education, because it's, you know, what ICANN does is one thing, but education of end users is also something really important. And so we're committed in our community to do it as much as possible for end users to beware of what they receive in the mail, in their emails, and you know, the click here type things that they shouldn't be following. We are focused on specific registries and registrars that have high percentages of abuse registrations. I think the great majority of the industry is doing exceedingly well in making sure they don't have problems, but it's only a handful that are effectively causing some of the problems. And finally, at-large also supports the SSAC recommendations, Security and Stability Advisory Committee recommendations, including the documents SAC 114 and SAC 115. I don't remember the name, the titles of them, but you can search for them. SAC 114 and SAC 115. That's all. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Olivier. Wolf Ulrich, you're next.
Yes, hello. Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. My name is Ulrich Knoben, and I had this time the pleasure also to lead the entire CSG throughout ICANN71. So CSG is a commercial stakeholder group, and for those who don't know, and it's comprised from the BCs, the business constituency, and the IPC, intellectual property constituency, and our constituency, the ISPCP, which means Internet Service Providers and Connectivity Providers, for those who never learned this. So we had also in this context, so a chance starting not just last week when officially ICANN 71 took place to discuss DNS abuse, but also in the meetings before that. For example, we had a meeting with the GAG a public safety working group on this issue, and we had on Monday this week a meeting with the entire board to discuss DNS abuse inter alia with them. So it's SECSG, to understand that it's not a institutionalized body in that sense, that we are voting within the CSG, and we do not have as a CSG representatives on the GNS Council for policy making. So we do it by ourselves, constituency by constituency, but we put together a program of priority for that, and DNS abuse is one of the major items of this program for the near priority. Specifically with regards to DNS abuse, the ISPCP, we had in our constituency meeting invited a representative from ESAC with whom we discussed the ESAC 115 document, and especially, you know, the to raise questions regarding what could be the impact on ISPs and on our members on that, because that seems to be a more indirect impact than to others, for example, the registrars, registries, or the end user itself who is using the DNS directly. So for the ISPs and for those who providing that service, it comes to them in case, you know, somebody raises his hands and says, oh, there is a problem. And please help me. You are the network provider, or you are the service provider, and there is a problem. I can't use this service, and please help me, whatever that means. So it could not come directly from our direct service, but it means that we are, you know, we may have in contact to those people and customers who are using our service, and so we have to follow them. And that is what we try to find out, how that is interworking, how that comes together. In this respect, I have also a question which we have then to discuss further on, is when we discuss that with the Public Safety Working Group of GAC, so especially definitions of what is laid down in the SAC 115 document. So there came opinions to the table saying, okay, that is not flexible enough. That only covers, I got this figure, 2% of what is meant, what we understand of DNS abuse, and 98 of that is not in what is right now on the table of definitions. So that is a big issue for us, and so that is what we are going to follow and to discuss internally, also to find out and to try, from our point of view, well, to be more precise with the definitions in order to find out how that is really impacting us. So that's, from our point of view, yes, my first contribution. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ulrich. I see that Jorge has joined us and that he would like to make an intervention. So Jorge, welcome to the call, and over to you.
Thank you, Thomas. Do you hear me okay?
We can hear you all right.
Okay, that's great. This is Jorge Cancio, for the record. And you said Swiss GAC representative. I happen also to be one of the GAC vice chairs. Happy to be here. And I think Sam and Ashley gave a very good overview of where DNS abuse was being dealt with at ICANN71. I think it was actually all over the place. I can recall that we discussed it with the board, we discussed it with the GNSO Council, we discussed it with ALAC, the public safety working group discussed it with the registry stakeholder group, with the registrar stakeholder group, with the SAC, with many stakeholders in the community. And actually, I think that's the main point. We are talking, everyone is talking to each other. And I think that beyond questions of definitions that are maybe still outstanding, the real question is to start having some concrete progress, and there was some concrete progress, for instance, on this framework on domain generating algorithms associated with malware and botnets. Well, that's a very concrete, specific piece of work which was presented at ICANN71. But of course, we are still in conversations with the board and with the GNSO, because equally as ALAC or SAC, we think that DNS abuse has to be addressed seriously before we engage into a next round. And this doesn't mean that we are trying to block any next round, but that we still have enough time for that next round to come to us. We still have the ODP, and in the meantime, we can do a lot of progress in getting things forward. And I welcome very much what I heard from Sam from the registries, that they will be looking at the CCT recommendations, amongst which there are some on DNS abuse, to see what we can tackle, what can we address in the short term, because this is really what we intend with the different advice we've been giving in the last years, and follow-up advice is that we try to address this seriously. Of course, we cannot solve everything before the next round really starts, but we should at least try. So this is very welcome. And if you read the communique where DNS abuse or related issues like CCT recommendations pop up at different times, what we are calling on the board is precisely that, to also on the CCT recommendations, to get the community together to talk about the recommendations which are still pending, and to see how we can get to work on those. So I leave it by that, and thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Jorge. Before I ask whether any other panelists wish to speak to that, we have a question from Andrew Kempling, and I'm going to read that for everyone. What can be done to encourage recursive resolvers to block access to malicious content? A number of the open resolvers do not do this, e.g. 8888, or at least do not do so for their lead offering, e.g. 1111. Why offer a service that increases the attack surface of its users? Anyone wishes to respond to that? But Ulrich.
Well, hello, Andrew. So nice that you are in the circle here. So we had a chance, well, with you, to get a presentation on the your suggestion for a European policy on revolvers, and it's going to be internally discussed. I do hope you had after our session, which you had with you, a chance or have been approached by some of our members who are more inclined and more familiar with that issue. So I personally, I can't give you an answer, but I would like to take this question again to find out a potential member who could get in contact with you from the ISP side. Thank you.
Thanks, Wolf Ulrich. So we should move to the next topic, but before we do, I want to make sure that we've given everyone the opportunity to speak. So Philippe, you have raised your hand, so there you go.
Thank you. I hope you can hear me. This is Philippe here from Orange, and indeed from the GNSO. I was about to and I'm sorry, I thought there was still a raised hand function in GoTo. I'm not used to this one. Yes, just a quick follow-up on both Jorge and the presentation from Ashley and Sam. I just want to commend the contracted parties for actually kickstarting the actual work. I think it's really important that we, even from a purely PDP stewardship point of view, council's perspective, we see that by launching our EPDPs, our constraint is very much into focusing the work, and the jury's still out as to whether there is a need for policy work on this. I think we still don't know. But on this one, it's crucial that we come up with a common understanding of what DNS abuse is, on the remit of the problem, what is actually achievable in terms of solutions, what are those solutions that would actually pertain to a policy work, what others would not actually be policy work at all. So I think that's a really important piece of work that the CPH has provided, and I'm glad that everyone is embarking on this. Obviously, the GNSO Council will be looking on this very, very closely as to, again, on that question that we're mostly interested in the need for a policy work. But I just want to share that, because I know that even as Jorge said, we've been pinged over and over again in our conversations with the board, with our GAC colleagues on the need for action. But to defend those actions, we need to actually frame the problem. So thanks again for that. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Philippe. So I see no visual hands up on camera. Olivier, if you could keep it brief, that would be great.
Yeah, thanks, Thomas. It's Olivier Crépin-Blanc speaking. Just answering the question from Andrew Kempling, or maybe not answering it, but providing one reminder. You know, he was speaking about open resolvers, and ICANN is not a regulator. It doesn't go out there and act as the world's policeman. And of course, these open resolvers are run by independent entities. They are allowed to resolve whatever they want to resolve within, of course, the law of their jurisdiction, wherever they are. It's not for ICANN to decide whether they should carry or not carry specific domain names. And I think that needs to be reminded, because often we have end users coming to us and say, why does ICANN allow this? Well, ICANN is not in the business of allowing or not allowing things. And that's why I thought I'd mention it in this specific set. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Olivier. Giovanni.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. Good evening, good morning. Just to say that I don't know if you are aware, but I guess many of us are aware that the European Commission recently launched an external party study on DNS abuse. So I was particularly happy to hear from Samantha at the very beginning that there is a definition of DNS abuse, because this is what this external party contracted by the Commission has been looking for. I hope they know that there is already a definition somewhere. And at least at European level, there is a certain interest at registry and registrar level to see the very first draft of this DNS abuse study commissioned by the EC. And indeed, it will be something the European Commission will work on in the future to come up with some papers and eventually proposals of regulations. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Giovanni. Now, I can't resist to make a final remark before we move to the next topic. And while I speak, Olivier can get ready to talk about SubPro, the subsequent procedures in a moment. For those who are not too familiar with what ICANN is doing, ICANN, according to its bylaws, has a very limited mandate for policymaking. And we have this controversy in the ICANN community that some think that the definition of DNS abuse should be broader because users should be held. Andrew, you're making a good point that users should be protected in certain scenarios. But the question is, who can do what? And even if the registries and the registrars wanted to take action, in this case, they don't control independent recursive resolvers. So they couldn't bring about a change in that regard. And even worse, if ICANN started a policy development process to do something against DNS abuse, that could be tested against ICANN's bylaws. And some of you might remember that ICANN is now independent of the US government, and that in the course of the IANA chip transition, the community came up with an accountability regime whereby the global stakeholder community can take action against the ICANN board if the board chooses to do things outside ICANN's mission. So even if ICANN wanted to, ICANN has to stick to its very limited mandate. And there are those, and I'm trying to keep this as neutral as possible, who go with a very narrow definition of what constitutes DNS abuse. And there are some in the community that think that the definition should be far broader, and that ICANN should take action for a much broader scope of abuse that we see out there. And I think it's important to have this discussion to discuss who is responsible for what, who can do what are the limitations of the roles of ICANN, and also the types of intermediaries that are represented in the ICANN community. Because a hosting provider is a much better place to take action in certain cases than the contracted parties, for example. So I think the contracted parties have done an excellent job in explaining what they're doing, or explaining more what they're doing, but I think more education needs to be brought out there to sort out who can do what is the collateral damage if somebody's stepping over, even if they do that with the best intentions, right? So this discussion is going to be with us for, I guess, another couple of months. So at future readouts, I'm sure we're going to pick that up again and give you another update. Great. Sorry for chiming in, although I should only be the moderator for this, but I thought that I should at this point. And with that, let's move to sub-pro, which is also an important topic that's been discussed at ICANN71. Over to you, Olivier.
Thank you very much, Thomas. Olivier Crépin-Leblanc speaking. I think we've already spent half an hour on DNS abuse. You said it might be a topic for another couple of months. Did you mean a couple of years? Because this really is it's a big topic for ICANN, and you can see you can never win. You give more to ICANN. ICANN does more on DNS abuse than it gets accused of doing too much and of being the overall despot in the world and doing less. ICANN is accused of being useless and doing nothing. So, at least we're all committed to this. Now, the subsequent procedures. Now, I had some slides, but I don't know whether the slides will be shared by you guys or by me. If they're to be shared by me, then I need to share my screen, but I need to get the green light to do so. Aha, here we go. So let's find out those slides in here. Sub-pro, there you go. And that should work. Okay, so the subsequent procedures, subsequent rounds of new generic top-level domains has been a topic that started the day after the previous round finished. So the previous round was completed in 2012, and pretty soon afterwards, the work started in the generic name supporting organization to basically start a new process and go through the whole system. Where you can see it's not in 2012, but as soon as there was implementation for a number of years, so the new generic top-level domains were being rolled out. And then in March 2016, the work group was chartered to review first the rights protection mechanisms on one side, which was to do effectively with intellectual property rights and so on. But then also, there was a final report on this, but then you had a full report on every single part of the GNSO, of the policy development process. What am I doing? Am I in the right thing? Yes. Let me just take you through the process. So rights protection mechanism was one thing, but the other thing, of course, was to do with the subsequent procedures as a wider scope. And in there, it looked at effectively every single aspect of the previous program, where it basically started with, every single thing. So you're speaking about continuing having another round of new GTLDs, which was something of importance. Maybe I can share this instead, because I think that it pauses when I share the wrong thing. So how do I do that? And then I'll share a new thing. Does it do that? Maybe it doesn't. Okay, never mind. And so effectively the overall topics, if you want, ended up being 41 topics, looking at every single aspect of the previous round, leaving no stones unturned, and ranging from predictability in applications, whether they were going to be assessed in rounds, whether they were going to be assessed all in as a continuous system, whether there were going to be different types of top-level domains, whether you would continue having limits to the number of applications that each applicant could make, everything basically, including the updates to the applicant guidebook. If you remember back then, maybe you might not remember back then, but there was an applicant guidebook that was published, and then a few amendments were made to the program on the fly until the whole launch was done. So all of that had to be looked at, and it's a huge amount of work that took several years to pursue. That included things about applicant support, about the queuing systems, how applicants would be queued up for launch and so on, changes of applications, a lot of technical stuff that goes on behind the scenes effectively. Registrant protections, geographic names, closed generics. So closed generics being generic names that are used by, that are offered by single entity, internationalized domain names, something which has grown a lot since the last round. Security and stability being something really important as well. Name collisions, so names that might be similar to other names that might induce some either confusion in people's heads, but also that work with some names that are already in use in local area networks or in private surroundings. Things like .home, for example, where a lot of the world's computers are shipped out with a default as being .home. And if you then have .home being provided on the top-level domain scale, that might introduce problems locally. All sorts of topics there, and it basically was a very, very long process that was pursued over the years. So what we end up with now is a system, whereas the final report from the generic name support organization has been provided, and the GNSO Council approved the resolution for the outputs. It requested the board to consider and direct implementation of the outputs, and it requested the board to initiate the operational design phase, something we've heard earlier, the ODP, operational design phase. And it also requested ICANN.org, that's the ICANN organization, to convene an implementation review team. So that's where we are today. The next steps, so from April until June, the ICANN board had a call for input, conducting a public comment proceedings for subsequent procedure outputs. Then the ICANN board will be responding to some of the advice that it has received. The ALAC made, produced advice on 12 areas. I'm not going to list a whole lot of them, but it's a particularly long statement. And many of the other ICANN communities and constituencies also sent advice. So it's quite a large task to review all of that. Then the ICANN board will initiate the operational design phase at some point in the future, and will convene also the implementation review team. So we're looking at something that's not going to happen within 24 hours. It's quite likely that it will be another year at least until we've got the next launch coming up. And it's interesting because so many things have been touched on. There has been no decision made specifically on whether there should be a prioritization on the type of new GTLDs that should be applied for or could be applied for. And that's still a debate that's going on out there. So I'll leave you with that. You know, I guess others have, I'm sure, tons of things to add to that. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Olivier. Who wants to go first and add to that?
Have I killed everyone?
Well, do you hear me?
Yeah, Jorge, go ahead.
I have no hands, so I cannot raise it. I'm sorry. I can only talk. So this is Jorge. You know, this is being a government official. You are restricted in the means you can use. So we have no go-to on the PC, and we have no hands, therefore, and no camera. So sorry, and my apologies for being a bit maimed in this exercise. Well, I will spare you the details of the GAC position on this. Let's say that we had a very extensive exchange with the board at ICANN71. The exchange is appended to the communique, so you can have a look at that. We focused on the so-called overarching issues that we included in our input to the public comment that Olivier was referring to, and amongst other things, that the reviews and the recommendations of the reviews that have been filed in the last years that should be implemented or addressed, that DNS abuse needs to be addressed, and that we are still expecting an objective and independent analysis of costs and benefits of the last round, as we called for 5 years ago at the Helsinki meeting. So that was part of the discussion. Another part which could be also underlined is the complexity of the recommendations. If we compare the policy recommendations of today, of this year, with those of 2007, there's a huge change, and maybe those recommendations could fit in 3 pages or in 4 pages, and now we have, I don't know how many hundreds or dozens of pages of recommendations. So there's a shift. I think this is also something that we talked about at the plenary session we had at ICANN71 regarding the complexity, how complexity both in terms of content and in terms of process has a big impact on participation levels. And for instance, in SubPro, from the GAC perspective, we've been trying to be active in the process during the last 5 years. And precisely in Helsinki, it was the first time we invited the co-chairs of a PDP working group to come over to the GAC to explain what they were intending to do. And we had at that moment Jeff and Ari explaining that. And as Jeff has mentioned, they have been coming for 13 or 14 meetings in a row, very kindly to the GAC meetings to explain things to us. Because honestly, there were hardly any GAC members in the SubPro proceedings, with the exception of Work Track 5 on geo names as top-level domains, because it's really basically impossible if you have only 1 person in a delegation, or at most 2 persons, but who devote perhaps 10% of their time to ICANN, that they could devote hundreds of hours a year for such a huge process like subsequent procedures. To cut the story short, what I want to say is that we should think about cutting back on complexity, cutting back on policy complexity go back to basics when we talk about policy, and this could spur participation levels. So that's a bit my personal comments, also connecting it with the plenary session. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jorge. Ashley, you raised your hand in the chat as well, so over to you.
Yeah, for what it's worth, Jorge, I have no LEMs either. Not sure if this platform has the ability to raise hands, but maybe I'm just too new to this. But I just wanted to say, you know, and I'm going to make a very sweeping comment here, so I apologize. But SubPro and the next round of TLDs hasn't been a huge area of focus for registrars. That's, I think, just the nature of our business. This is much more impactful on registries and those who want to be registries. But that being said, I think we really do want to see this be a success. Because it's a reflection on ICANN as an organization and their ability to conduct policy development processes. So we do have that interest, along with, you know, the overarching goal to see real competition in the space, to allow for an environment that spurs new innovation. You know, I'd hate to see, you know, our little area of the world become stagnant. So, and I think a new round could really, you know, facilitate new ways in how the space is used. So that's another reason why I think it'd be really helpful to see this succeed. But that being said, you know, while I agree with Jorge in terms of let's get back to basics and, you know, simplicity, that's a bit of an overstatement perhaps, but I do have concerns over statements like we need to address DNS abuse first, because I don't know what that means. And it kind of gives rise to this perception that one day DNS abuse will be solved. And I think that's a really difficult proposition, because I don't think we'll ever solve DNS abuse. And I think we need to be realistic about that. And I would hate to see, you know, us slow down in our forward moving efforts as ICANN over a vague reference. I don't want that to sound derogatory, but I just think going back to our previous conversation, we need to be very clear as to what we're trying to achieve and to be pragmatic about it. So anyway, I'll stop there, not be too long-winded. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ashley. Anyone else? Philippe, and then Olivier, and then we move to the next topic, I suggest.
Thank you, Thomas. And just a quick comments on this. There would be so many things to say, really, and it's not surprising for almost now 10-year project. And precisely, I think we're all aware of the expectation from the community on this, and for this to be expedited, no pun intended, but to be concluded as quickly as possible. I think the timing of the ODP will be one element. And to this point, it will be, I think people have to realize that it will be a huge challenge for the organization to have this in place in parallel to the SSAD, two major projects, possibly unprecedented for the latter. And the experience of the former is not something 10 years later that we can capitalize on. So it's going to be really difficult. And I just want to pick up on a comment that Ashley made on the sort of the fact that we cannot be schizophrenic in terms of complaining about ICANN being heavy, spending 10 years on something and not being able to make a decision. I think at some point we can't just carry over these things. Maybe, and I'm not lecturing anyone on this. Maybe there's a way to sort of, I think Olivier referred to approach this in segments. Possibly, I don't know if it's a way to move forward. That's one idea. What's for sure is that there cannot always be something to address along the way, if you see what I mean. And to that point, I think in those days where as it is regularly the multi-stakeholder model is questioned in the broader landscape of technical internet governance, I think we need to be solid as a community, and I think that 10 years for this is long enough. I think we all appreciate that, and at some point we need to move forward. Again, this is broad comments, but being involved in ICANN, sometimes we need to step back a bit and consider that from those guys who've been waiting for this for 4 and 5 years, and we tell them it's coming, it's now coming, and it's not. So I think in all fairness, we have to realize that something has to give, and there has to be an end to everything, I guess, to every project in ICANN. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Philippe. Olivier?
Yeah, thank you for this, Thomas. Olivier Clapin-Leblanc speaking. And just to give you an idea of numbers that Jorge alluded to, yes, hundreds of recommendations, 41 separate topics, 41. 400-page documents that came out of this. And we're not talking about, documents with pages and pages of fluff. It's absolutely concentrated stuff. So very, very, I personally, when the whole process started and having been involved with the previous round of new generic top-level domains, the previous application round and the preparation of that, and the various iterations of the applicant guidebook, I was a bit concerned that we'd go through a tick-the-box scenario where, you just go and say, okay, chapter 1, yep, done, and be done with it. It is so great to see a document and a working group that has gone to such depth that I think the legitimacy of the next round will be stronger than there has ever been in there. I can't see someone today, personally, who can just go with a clear face and say, we don't need this new round, new GTLDs, new whatever, because it's all wrong. Because I tell you what, the group has really worked extremely hard on this, and it goes as a testimony, as far as I'm concerned, to the multi-stakeholder model, to see a group of people work together on something like this and to come up with a new round that I'm sure will be much better and much more accepted, hopefully, than the previous one. At least when it comes down to the politics of it, etc. That's all I needed to say. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Olivier. So with that, I think we can move to the last main topic, which is the EPDP Phase 2A. You've for sure heard about the EPDP, and Philippe is going to give you a very brief overview of where we are with this, and I'm sure that this topic is going to be dealt with slightly faster than the other 2 months. Philippe, over to you.
Thank you, Thomas. So indeed, very, very quickly, and I think we must have talked about this one at our last webinar. The EPDP for expedited is, and we tend to shortcut these things, but it's not the EPDP, it's the EPDP on GTLD registration data. We now have an EPDP on transfer, I think, and on IDN, so we need to be specific. So that was launched. And I think officially late last year, and practically in January, took a while to kick off, convene the team, etc. Its remit is tightly focused. It's on the distinction between legal and natural in the who is, as well as the feasibility of using contact addresses. So that's really 2 questions that are very specific. In terms of progress, as far as ICANN71 is concerned, it's the milestone of producing what's called the initial report, and it was published on the 3rd of June, I think, early June. It includes preliminary recommendations as well as questions for the community on those 2 aspects. It was a hard work by the team, and I think just to give you an idea, we have that notion in the PDP of having can't live with items, and that's a figure that I like to refer to, because there were 80 at the beginning of drafting that initial report. So that tells you something on the work that the leadership has put into that to try and make sure that we have that initial report for the community. So that said, there are a number of questions in the initial report. So in broad terms, so I'll defer to Thomas for the detail, but it's much more guidelines than consensus policy that we're talking about here, and I'm sure Thomas will elaborate on on this, as well as the other element that is interesting in terms of consulting the community is the triggers that might have to be defined in terms of once this is agreed upon, and moving on with the development of regulatory frameworks, when and how that policy or those guidelines may have to be reconsidered. So I'll stop here. The consultation period ends in mid-July. So please have a look if you're interested, if you're and anyone for that matter. There are questions for everyone in the community, depending on whether you're a contracted party or not. So please have a look and respond to the consultation. So I'll turn it back to you, Thomas. I'm sure you can elaborate on the actual work of the team.
Thanks very much, Philip. I think Philip is mentioning my name because I happen to be one of the EPDP team members. So I've been working with the bigger group on this report, and I'd like to echo that this has been a Herculean task, particularly for the leadership and ICANN staff as well. So they did a great job in helping us get this report together. As it's customary these days in ICANN, the public comment is structured in a Q&A format, so it's relatively easy to chime in. And I'd really like to encourage you to avail yourselves of that opportunity and go to the public comment section on the ICANN website and chime in. Philip, you've mentioned the questions that have been subject of the EPDP. We're basically trying to find out whether we forgot anything in our guidance, whether there are aspects that you think are missing. So please take a look at that. We're not going to go too much more detail during this session. Is there anyone that wishes to speak to those points? The EPDP 2A? Wolf Ulrich.
Just briefly, Thomas. I cannot contribute content-wise. So we are we have the majority almost here from the ISPCP in this round. I see Philip, you, and myself. We are three from our constituency, and you are the one representing us on the EPDP 2A team here. But my question is, and we discussed that in the constituency meeting, the public comment, how it is going to work. If you look back to what was said by staff and also by my team members, is the expectation for this public comment is it should be answered in a different way, not just come up with arguments who have been exchanged 100 times through 100 meetings on the EPDP team, but come up with new stuff. So I'm asking myself, how should we deal with that? So you know the answer. So what we have done in our constituency is we ask you and Christian as EPDP members to come up with a proposal for answering those questions and for public comment, and then we can discuss it in our constituency. And there may come up if possible, some new ideas which may be helpful to the team. Otherwise, I don't see really for those specific tasks you have dealt with, legal tasks and so on, which not too many people in the ICANN community, rather than the lawyers of the IPC and other lawyers as well, maybe close with. So how that should work. So we will rely on your expertise for those from the experts. We try to understand as a broader community what's going on and try to chime in. So that's what we can do. I would like also to see from others, from ALEC, how they are dealing and the registries with that, whether they are really coming up with new comments on this one. That would be interesting from us. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Wolf Ulrich. Does anyone want to respond to that here, or shall we take that offline? We have like 17 minutes left on this call, and we have another few topics. So I don't see any hands. Ashley.
Yeah, I'll be quick,
Please.
because I wrote it is a complicated topic, and that's why I'm going to make this reference. The participants from the Registrar Stakeholder Group to the EPDP Phase 2A, we actually did a blog post that you can see on Circle ID that kind of goes into why this isn't. Oftentimes, you'll see things kind of captured in a way that sound very straightforward and easy, when in reality they aren't. There's a lot more complexity behind it. So I encourage you all, if you're interested, if you're looking to perhaps submit comments on this, to look at the perspective that we tried to capture in this blog post to kind of give you a little bit more flavor into the discussion. Because if you're not living and breathing the EPDP Phase 2A, which I hope you aren't, you don't always catch like the complexities that are actually really there. So I encourage you to give it a read if you'd like. James Bladel was the one who posted it. And I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Ashley. I suggest we move to the next topic, which is not a DNSO discussion, but we have Giovanni with us. And Giovanni is going to talk about discussions that they had in the CCNSO on planning prioritization. Giovanni, over to you.
So thank you, Thomas. Thank you, everybody, for this opportunity. I'm a member of the CCNSO Council. I work as External Relations Manager at URID, the .eu registry manager. And I'm also the chair of the CCNSO Strategic and Operating Planning Committee. For those of you who are not familiar with the so-called short SOPC, the Strategic and Operating Planning Committee is a committee that was formed in 2008 during the ICANN meeting in Cairo. And the objective of this committee is to facilitate the participation of CCTLD managers into the planning processes of ICANN. So every time there is an ICANN public comment period on a strategic plan or an operating plan or financial plan or IANA plan, we try to look into the document and provide our input. The SOPC is made of 22 members and 1 observer, and we do have support by the CCNSO Secretariat. The most recent comment that we produced is a comment that we put forward on the ICANN draft fiscal year 22-26 operating and financial plan, and which was a quite monumental document, over 300 pages to comment. And so the first comment we made was that it was not so accessible, even and especially for the non, let's say, English mother tongue, because of the complexity of the language of such a long document. But there is another comment, or at least a set of comments that we reiterated over the years, which is the inconsistency in the document among metrics, KPIs, milestones, and also priorities. So one of the recurring comments of the SOPC has been the lack of consistency when it comes to prioritizing ICANN work. And luckily, during the meeting that we had last week with the ICANN Planning Finance Department, we were anticipated that ICANN is about to launch a very interesting process, which is called the ICANN Prioritization Framework Project. And as some of you may know, the ICANN plan, operating plan, is divided into operating initiatives and functional activities. And planning at ICANN is one of the operating initiatives. So the ICANN planning team last week shared with us that they are going to announce soon this, let's say, planning prioritization project, which means that the whole community will be called to support and help ICANN in prioritizing their work. And at present, the ICANN planning team is in the phase of identifying the scope of this work, to set the boundaries, to understand what kind of operational operational initiatives or functional activities will fall into this prioritization project. What kind of prioritization techniques will be made available to the community to help ICANN prioritize in their work? And also, this will be launched with a series of webinars at regional level, but also for all the community. So this will help ICANN to, let's say, produce the yearly operating and financial plans. And we believe, as the strategic and operating committee of the CCNSO, that this is going to be quite a huge milestone for ICANN, because indeed the community will be called to support ICANN in a process that we have suggested many times ICANN should have worked more. And this is the time for us to show that we appreciate this effort that ICANN is making, and that we can indeed contribute to this effort. So the current plan, as we were shared last week, is to start this process in a pilot format from the consultations on the fiscal year operating plan and financial plan for fiscal year 23, and then to make this a yearly exercise from the fiscal year 24. So that is what the SOPC of the CCNSO is very much looking forward to contribute. And again, we have established an extremely constructive relation with the ICANN planning team, so that for us, after having, let's say, made the comment, made the point with ICANN for so many years, this is indeed a big achievement. And we really look forward to working together with ICANN planning on this subject. So we should stay tuned, everybody, any member of the community, on the ICANN site, because soon they will launch this process. And so we can all contribute, and it's a sort of duty for everybody to contribute. That's it at my end. Again, the SOPC of the CCNSO is regularly working with ICANN to refine the different planning and strategic processes. So I'm happy to answer any question or gather any comment you may have. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Giovanni. Is there any instant reaction to Giovanni's intervention? Wolf Ulrich, please.
Thanks, Giovanni, for that. We had also with ICANN Finance the opportunity to discuss that, and we had also with the board last week when we discussed our priorities. That was related to the pending implementation of a series of recommendations, and in context with that, there is a prioritization project is an important one. My only concern was, ICANN was promising, the tools you mentioned, for prioritization as well. So I do hope that we don't get any. I'm not sure. And I would be interested to know from you whether you had an insight in those tools. So whether these are more gaming tools or these are serious tools which are really, really simple. They must be simple. That's what I also was my concern in that meeting, to tell the board it must be simple, really, not to raise too many expectations on the side which could not be fulfilled. So that's my comment on that. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Wolf Ulrich. Giovanni.
Yeah, thank you, Thomas, and thank you, Wolf Ulrich. Indeed, this was one of the questions that the Strategic and Operating Committee had towards ICANN finance planning. And the answer that we got is that they are still looking into the different tools options. And they didn't make any example, but indeed one point that we made is that those tools should be as accessible as possible, and as you said, as simple as possible, because that would be instrumental to for ICANN to collect as much input as they wish to receive. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Now we have 8 minutes left. I'd like to give the last 5 minutes to Chris to talk about future ICANN meetings. And in the remaining 3 minutes, is there anything that any one of you wants to report that we haven't yet discussed that might be of interest for everyone? So Olivier, 30 seconds for you.
Thanks very much, Thomas. Olivier Crépin-Leblanc speaking. Two things. First, the transfer policy development process. I don't know how many people always try to transfer the registration of a domain name from one registrar to another registrar, a different supplier. A lot of people do that. It's an overly complex process. There's a policy development process that has started on this right now to simplify things and to make things more accountable and easier for end users and also for the industry to be able to transfer these registrations from one supplier to another supplier. So that's one, very important. You can follow it. The work is just starting. And second thing, I wanted to just remind everyone that universal acceptance, which is the acceptance by websites and online forms of internationalized domain names, but even sometimes new generic top-level domains. So when you use an email address which doesn't have one of the old legacy, doesn't use one of the old legacy domain names, but uses a more recent one, universal acceptance is still terrible. There's still so many places where they're not properly recognized and it doesn't work in the forms. It's down to all of you, everyone watching, to actually check with their providers, and if they find that there are problems, then notify them and tell them you got to fix that. That's all. Thank you.
Thanks very much. And Philip, you're going to get the last bite of the apple before we move to Chris.
Well, thanks, Thomas. I'm not sure that's going to be the last word, but I just wanted to react and maybe conclude on what Giovanni said on the need for prioritization within org. And the observation was that the degree of activity, the workload within org is a reflection of the workload of ICANN, broadly speaking. It's a reflection of the workload on the community, and the need for prioritization also exists within the community at large and within the GNSO in particular. We've started something, and if only we could cut down the administrative burden that is sometimes the plague of ICANN on occasions. It would be a huge achievement, I think, especially in these days when the community is stretched in terms of workload. We've initiated a pilot within the GNSO. Maybe that's not the right tool for this, but we'll see. Anyway, I think we're all aware of the sort of problem. That is indeed slightly broader than the need for prioritization within org, which I think we have to address collectively. Thanks, Thomas.
Thanks very much, Philippe. And Chris, maybe you can give us a little update on where we are in future ICANN meetings.
Yes, just a couple of key milestones. And on this last discussion, I want to thank everyone that works also on the governance and operations and the organizational effectiveness of all of our work. So whether you're interested in the topics we're discussing or in how a multi-stakeholder policy body works, there are many ways to get involved, and people work very hard. ICANN72 is our next meeting, and it's scheduled for Seattle, October 23rd through 28th. And in July 8th will be the debate, and July 20th will be the decision by the ICANN board as to what format and whether and how to hold the meeting. We conducted a survey of the community to get some sentiment, to gather some inputs, and fully 75% of the respondents did feel comfortable meeting in Seattle, provided that they could get to Seattle. And in fact, we're quite relaxed about various potential security and safety measures that would be put into place. That's the community sentiment. The logistics are another question, because it's unclear as the COVID crisis continues in some parts of the world while diminishing in North America, largely, where the meeting is scheduled, creates some challenges as to whether people can actually get there. The backlogs for applications for visas are quite significant. And in fact, the travel, as people who may be starting to try to travel, is a little bit complex internationally. That said, on a philosophical basis, we're clearly running at the end of our patience for virtual meetings in some respect. We have a strong desire to get back to face-to-face meetings. It makes for better outcomes and discussion. But there is a consideration of inclusiveness and whether we reinforce any perceived cleavages or difficulties of participation that have always been discussed in the ICANN context. So there is no decision yet. There is a strong sentiment that we should try something. And I just say watch this space. Over the course of the next 30 days, we'll know what that Seattle meeting ICANN72 will look like. It may look like this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris. And with that, I'd like to end this webinar. Thanks everyone for attending, and thanks to our panelists, Ashley, Sam, Olivier, Wolf Ulrich, Giovanni, and Jorge. And I shall also thank Marie from the ECO team and Lars, who've been working in the background to make this happen. And I hope that I will see you all soon again, either in person or on occasion of one of our webinars. Thank you so much, and this meeting is now adjourned. Take care.
Thank you.